Nana mihi mahana e ho mā, pai ki te koutou, ki konei hoki. Welcome again, friends, to this reflection on the Gospel that today comes to us from John chapter 5, verses 17 to 30. It's also St. Patrick's Day, a day when we may raise a glass of Guinness to that fantastic Irish saint in his memory. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, it's also the very sad anniversary of the beginning of the land wars, which began in 1860 between the British government and Indigenous Māori. They raged on for about 25 years all over the North Island to ika a Maui. It's still Lent and we're travelling towards Jerusalem and the Easter Cross, so there is lots for us to reflect on. When he was a teenager living in Britain, Patrick was kidnapped by Irish raiders and taken to Ireland against his will. He became a slave, was pressed into service looking after stock on the bleak northern Irish mountains. He was often hungry, naked, and totally uncared for. These were very hard years for him. After 6 years of planning to escape, he managed to escape by travelling 200 miles to the sea, caught a boat for the continent, and eventually he made it all the way back to his home village. During this period, he had been reciting the prayers he had learnt as a child. Coupled with his suffering and adventure, these prayers produced a deep faith that helped him survive his ordeals. On getting home, he discovered his parents were dead, and in a sense he had returned from the dead himself, so life could not be the same. He took up village life, but he was always wondering for what purpose he had suffered and received so many scars on his adventures for. Eventually he went back to the continent to Gaul and studied for the priesthood. While he was doing this, he regularly had dreams of Irish voices calling him to come back to their land. His mentors discouraged him from listening to those voices, but eventually, once a bishop, he returned to Ireland. After 10 years, he had set up a base at Armagh and a network of churches and monasteries across the whole land, uniting that country. From this extraordinary return to the place of his oppression, Patrick was able to sow the seeds of reconciling love that he had discovered in Christ. First, though, he needed to let this happen in his own heart, but then it could flow out to all of Ireland. As I mentioned, in stark contrast, today marks the beginning of a very dark period in our peaceful country's history. The land wars began as a response to the British government needing land for the increasing number of settlers coming into Aotearoa, New Zealand, and they sought to take land from Māori, usually by force, as the Māori never wanted to give up their land. It is a sad history that is now being faced up to by many here, but it could have been avoided way back then. The scars of this period still weep in our land today. And of course our gospel always speaks to these types of issues. Yesterday we read about Jesus healing a disabled man at the pool of Bethesda, and today he is being called to account by the religious leaders in Jerusalem to explain his actions. He explains himself by describing the relationship he has with his Father. The Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing. Whatever the Father does, the Son does too. And in the same way, God and Jesus together are seeking to extend the tent, expand the mind, and deepen the love that these leaders knew. This explanation from Jesus speaks of a close relationship between him and his Father, maybe similar to the one between a tradesman father and his apprentice son, which was a common situation back in those days. Watching, listening, learning, and then doing. Who might we be apprenticed to? What life habits are we forming by watching and listening to others? What is happening in our hearts in response to the trials or struggles we may be facing or experiencing today? Like Patrick, like Jesus, do we have a close relationship with God? Or are we stuck with the rules about God that limit what God can actually do around us? I hope that following Jesus for you is as challenging as it is for me. I find it an adventure as my assumptions are challenged and questioned, as new experiences that I have on the road extend my understandings of who and how God operates in our world. I hope that those experiences for you deepen your love as I find my love having to be deepened and extended constantly. Today, as we remember St. Patrick, may we be willing like him and Jesus to go back to those with love who may have hurt us. May we apprentice ourselves to the type of love that God expresses, love that is free for all, that loves our enemies as well as those who are close to us. Of course, this is not easy, and Patrick was even discouraged from doing this and going back to Ireland, but he did, and he left a legacy of love, community and belonging. May we be inspired by him to do more than just raise a glass in his memory today. Arangamārie ki koutou. Peace be with you all.